Hi, in this tutorial for SWE 432, we're going to go through building the relatively simple to-do list app using React. So I'm going to get started using the create React app scripts to create that starter application that has all of the boilerplate that we need for having React do all of that fun stuff, compiling those JSX files into the regular JavaScript ones that can run in the browser. We saw that there were issues running the script on some Windows computers. So I'll distribute both the starting, the clean and empty version of this project, as well as the fully completed one that'll have all of the code in it if you want to take a look at that too. So it's done installing. So now I made in this folder to do state, so I can go in there. I can do npm start, which is going to start up that development server and launch our browser. Let's get rid of all this stuff. We'll get to that in a moment. Cool. So we've got that. It's running, doing this basic thing. Let's switch into IntelliJ, JetBrains. So we'll pick that project, hit open. All right, we'll go into our source app.js. And maybe let's just start off by changing this to show the various simple, well, we're going to make this into a to-do app, right? So we'll delete all this starter stuff, make a header that says to-dos. Now I can go over and take a look in my browser. We saw it's refreshed. All of that starter stuff is gone. It's just showing to-dos. So the system that we're going to build will be a simple to-do list that just lets you add items into a list, and then it's going to show them on the screen. So we want to express this in terms of components. And I think we're probably only going to have two components here. We'll have our app, and then we'll also have a to-do list. So let's make that component. Let's start putting stuff on the screen. I think that we will need to have a form, which we're going to use to put items into this list. Maybe we'll start with the form, and then we'll start building the list once we get data into a form. So I'll use that form tag. And inside of the form, we'll put a text input. So I'll say input. And I'll put a button here. And we'll make the button have the text add item. Now if we go back into our browser, we've got a text field here and a button that says add item. I can put stuff here, and I click it, and it kind of refreshes the page, which is probably not what we want, but let's just start with that. Let's have it do something else when we type text in here. I'd like it to maybe print out onto a console that something's happening. So I'm going to specify that for onSubmit, when the form is submitted, we're going to call a method. So let's write the method. By convention, methods like this that are handlers that we pass to things like onSubmit, onChange, so on and so forth, we call them handle something. So I might call it handle submit. We'll define that method. I'm going to make a constructor here also. The constructor is always going to get passed a single argument, which is props. These are the properties. You just have to kind of pass that up to the super type. It's like in Java when you make a class and extend something else, you always have to call the constructor and the parent thing, and that thing takes the props, so you got to pass the props. And I'm going to bind handle submit here to this. Bind this. And that's going to come up when now down here. I say that when the form is submitted, I want it to call this .handle submit. And putting that bind in here is going to make sure that when we call handle submit, when React calls handle submit, that the this that it's calling on is the component rather than the event or some internal React thing. So I got that. This event here is going to tell us that the form has been submitted. I'm going to introduce some built-in JavaScript stuff here, this prevent default. So as we talked about in the lecture, there's this bubbling thing that these events have, where after we handle an event, there might be other handlers for that event that are going to happen. So I would like to be the last one that handles this event. I don't want anything else in the browser responding to the form being submitted. Because there's this default thing in the browser that when I hit submit, it reloads the page. Don't want that. So we did prevent default. And then I'm going to maybe print out, hello, form submitted. And now if we go to our browser, we do this and nothing happens. And that's because it's doing this console log, it's printing it out, but it's not printing out in JetBrains, it's not printing it out here in our terminal, it's printing it out in the browser. So what we want to do is open up the developer tools. So in Chrome, this is how we get it. Under the settings here, there's a thing called developer tools. You can do this in Safari, anything that you want also. There are a whole bunch of different tabs here. The tab that we want to look at is console. So you can see, ta-da, it's printing out our log here, form submitted. We probably want to find out what this text is, though, right? So we want to have some way that we're going to read this text value in this submit handler. So we're going to use React's notion of that controlled component, of binding the state of a component into an HTML widget. So we're going to initialize this state for our app. And we'll have some part of our state that keeps track of the text being entered. And we're just going to initialize that to be an empty string. And then I'm going to bind our input here to say that its value is going to always be this.state.text for new item. So that's going to create that controlled component nature so that any string that's in the input will always be the text for that new item. Now if we jump back into Chrome, let's ignore that warning for now. I can no longer change this value whatsoever. And the reason for that is that I have bound its value to always be what the state is. And what's the state? Well, we initialized it and set it to be empty string. I can change this and say default string. And now you're going to see that this thing has default string in it. And again, it's stuck. We can't change it. So we like to be able to update the state. And specifically, we like to update the state when you change what's in this input. So we'll do that by adding another handler here. And we're going to handle, in this case, when the input is changed. So we're going to say handle change event. And we'll do the same thing with the binding. I'm going to say this dot handle change equals this dot handle change dot bind to this. And then down here for this input, let's get rid of that error. Let's say type equals text. And we'll say on change equals this dot handle change. Cool. And now in this handle change, just to get things started here, let's just do a console log and print out event. not knowing what we're supposed to do here. So now I just typed a letter. You can see that we got this printout, and it looks like this is an object, and this is the object that represents the event that just happened. And that event that just happened was we changed the text. And what we're interested in here is the target, which is going to be which object is being modified. So let's go back over here and do printout event.target. And now when we print out event.target, you can see it's actually this input type, which is like the box, and it's cool. Like when we hover over it, it shows us on the page that that's the target. And what we want to know is what the value that we're changing in there is. So we'll say target.value. So now I keep pressing the letter A, B, C, D, and you can see that this onChange is getting called, and it's printing out that what we're trying to change is to set the value of this thing to now be adding a string, G, F, whatever letter it is I'm typing on the keyboard. So in this handler, rather than just printing that out, I'm going to update the state. And remember, the way that we update the state is by calling this.setState. And we're going to say that the new state is going to be text for new item is going to be event.target.value. Now if we go back over here, I can change this text box as normal. Now, to demonstrate to you that we are in fact updating the state, I would strongly encourage you to install this extension in Chrome, the React Developer Tools. And the benefit of this thing is that now when you're running this development server, which you got for free when you type this npm start, you see this extra little icon is showing up that says that we've got React Developer Tools available. And that's available to us because we've got the plugin installed and because we're running this on our little server here using npm. And now if I click on this extension here, or if you have a wider screen, you'll just see this by default, React. It'll take a moment to connect, and what it's going to show here now is React's view of all of the components. So you see we've got this app at the top level, and then we've got a div inside of it, and it's h3, and the form, and this input. Now if I click on the component, which in this case is the app, we can see that there's state. And that state is that we've got this property called text for new item, and that's what it's set to. And as I change it, we can see that the state is changing too. So awesome. We are now updating the state of this thing when we type in it. What we'd like to do next probably is do something else when we click Add Item, besides just print out that the form is submitted. We now know that we're updating the state of our component, so we can read that state in here too, right? In our handle submit, I can say the state is now text colon this.state.text for new item. And when I click Add Item, we got it. So what I'd like to do is now have a list that's going to show up underneath or above this form item that keeps track of all of the things that we added to this list. So I'm going to do that by making a new component to demonstrate how we can nest components. So we'll call this to-do items, and it's going to extend component. We'll define a render method for this guy. And for render, I want to pass to it a list of properties. Or rather, I'd like to pass to it a list of items as properties. And we're going to show how properties can be any kind of object whatsoever. So let's start out just having this maybe return a div that says to-do items lists. And this will be a placeholder. And we'll add this thing. So I'll say underneath that form, I want to add a to-do items list. And I'm going to set this property to it. So let's say items equals this.state.items. And then I'm going to also at the same time initialize my state. So I'm going to, in addition to saying that we've got this default string, I'm going to make a list of items. Oops. And when we do handle submit, I'd like to push that string into that list of items. So let's say this.set state. And we can define this lambda here that transforms the state based on what it used to be. So I can say that given the previous state, I'd like to return an object that has items as prev state.items.concat with this dot. Well, let's make a variable here, make it clearer. Let new item equals this.state.text for new item. And then we're going to just add that item into this list. And we're going to clear the text for new item. So just unpack what's going to happen here. When this is called, we're going to read what that text is going to be. We're going to call this.setState. And in that case there, when we were writing new letters in that text box, we were just straight out overwriting the state, right? We said, I don't care what the old text for new item was, here's what the new one is going to be. In this case, I'd like to be pushing into this list this item. So I need to know what the old list was. So using this prev state syntax lets me see what the old state was too. So we got that. So now hopefully when we call handle submit, we're still not doing anything with showing stuff, but I should be changing the state so that we now have an array of what things we put here. So I said A1. When I clicked it, it disappeared. I look in my React state. I see text for new item is blank, which makes sense because this is blank. And I see an items array of size 1 that has A1. I can put A2 in it, and now A2 shows up. I can put A3 in it. I can put A4 in it, so on and so forth. State is updating. So I'm now going to bind all of that state into our to-do items list component. So I'm already kind of doing that because I say to-do items gets this property, which is going to be the items list. So it's down here. And in fact, in my component explorer here, I can look at to-do items, and I see that property, which is there. And it's got the current state of everything. So all that we really need to do is going to be actually create a list, like to render on the page. So we'll make that UL, that unordered list. And then let's use some fun JavaScript Lambda syntax. So I'll say this.props.items.map. And then for every item in that map, I'm going to apply and return this function. I don't need that, sorry. Which is going to just return a list item. And we'll give it item.text. And that needs to be in parentheses because it's what I return. Okay. Let's add the default string. And unfortunately, we get this error. Each child in an array or iterate should have a unique key prop. And what's happening here is React is upset because I'm generating automatically all of these list items, and React needs some way to know which one is mapped back to which item. And we're not giving it to React because there's no key here. So we need some unique ID basically so that we can update this text and React will update the page correctly. It needs to have some like traceability link. So let's just change slightly what this items array is. Each item, rather than just being a string, let's make this be an object, and it's going to be text is that, and we'll give it some ID also. And maybe just for simplicity, we can say the ID is date.now. So now every single one of those items is going to have this unique ID because the ID will be the time of when we added it. We'll be off by a millisecond or something, so it'll never be the same. That's unique. And then in here, oh, item.text. Huh, I already got ahead of you on that one. Sorry, that was probably an error too. So I'll specify that key. So that ID is mapping back onto where I build this ID here, and the text is mapping back onto where I build that text there. Now I'm going to hit add item. We see default string. Cool. I can do A2. Cool. I can do A3. Cool. Again, we see that our state now, we've got all this. We see the ID, we see the string. As I update the state, you can see that all that does, though, is redraw and modify the nodes on the page that have to. So I change the second one, and the second one gets redrawn. The rest of it stays the same. So that's it for the to-do app tutorial. I'd encourage you to take a look at this. Try to mess around with it a little bit. Maybe you could add a button to remove an item. Happy hacking!